Al-Shabaab recruitment in America. This hearing falls coincidentally on an important date. This is the 5th anniversary of the Madrid, Spain train bombings that killed 191 people and wounded another 1,800. The Madrid train bombings were a turning point in Islamist terrorism, turning from a centrally controlled movement to one that had also begun to act and has continued to do so through autonomous cells, in some cases with direct links to Al-Qaeda or other international terrorist groups, but in some other cases, no or very slight contact. This expanded the reach of violent Islamist ideology and made terrorism that much harder to detect and prevent. We have, for instance, seen Al-Qaeda franchise itself around the world in the now effectively defeated Al-Qaeda in Iraq, although there's some lingering elements still in a few of the cities, in Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb operating in North Africa, and in Al-Shabaab fighting and training terrorists in Somalia, which is in part the subject of the hearing today. But the turn toward more diffuse and international terrorism is the reason why the radicalization of radicalization and recruitment of individuals in the United States by Islamist terrorist organizations has been a major focus of this Homeland Security Committee's work over the past 2.5 years. The committee has held 7 hearings to date, the most recent one last July that focused on Islamist ideology as the essential ingredient to Islamist terrorism. And last May, the committee released a report titled Violent Islamist Extremism, the Internet and the Homegrown Terrorist Threat, that described the influence of online content produced by Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, and other Islamist terrorist groups on individuals like those who have now gone missing from the Somali American community right here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Today, we are going to focus on what appears to me to be the most significant case of homegrown American terrorism recruiting based on violent Islamist ideology. The facts, as we know them, tell us that over the last 2 years, individuals from the Somali community in the United States, including American citizens, have left for Somalia to support and in some cases fight on behalf of Al-Shabaab, which incidentally was designated as a foreign terrorist organization by our government in March of 2008. There are ideological, tactical, financial, and also personnel links between Al-Shabaab and Al-Qaeda. Al-Shabaab was credited with sheltering some of those responsible for the embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania. Just last month, Al-Qaeda released a video titled From Kabul to Mogadishu, in which Al-Qaeda's second-in-command, Ayman al-Zawahiri, praises Al-Shabaab and calls on Muslims throughout the world to join their fight in Somalia. Al-Shabaab, meanwhile, continues to release recruiting videos targeting Westerners, and those videos are surely being watched by some potential followers here in the United States. In the most graphic and deadly example of a direct connection between the Somalian American community and international terrorism, Shirwa Ahmed, a naturalized United States citizen living in the Minneapolis area, returned to Somalia within the last 2 years and killed himself and many others in a suicide bombing last October. According to FBI Director Robert Mueller, Ahmed, who was radicalized in Minnesota, is probably the first U.S. citizen to carry out a terrorist suicide bombing. One of the witnesses on our second panel, Abdi Mukhtar, who is the youth program manager at the Brian Coyle Center in Minneapolis, which is a gathering place for young Somalis. Abdi was friends and attended Roosevelt High School in Minneapolis with Ahmed. In his testimony, which I find very compelling and important, Abdi will explain how he and Ahmed had similar internal identity conflicts about being Somali and American, but in the end resolved those conflicts in very different ways. Abdi chose America, and Ahmed chose Islamist terrorism. This morning, we want to understand why, to the best of our ability, each made this choice and what we together can do to make sure that others, including succeeding generations of Somali Americans and more generally of Muslim Americans, make the right choice. I do want to say here that there is no evidence of radicalization of the Somali American community generally. In fact, I would, in my own vision of this, the Somali American community are victims of a small group of extremists who are essentially terrorizing their own community, who are recruiting and radicalizing young people within that community. And of course, our hope here this morning is to figure out how we can work together with the Somali American community, with the Muslim American community, with law enforcement as represented on our first panel, to not only protect young Somali Americans and perhaps other Muslim Americans, though we have noted in our earlier hearings that the Muslim American community, because it is more integrated, seems to have been much less vulnerable than Muslim communities in Europe to recruitment and radicalization. Nonetheless, the hearing today and other evidence that this committee has compiled shows that the problem, though it may be less severe here in America, is here. And that, I think, is what is jarring about the story that we're going to hear described today. There obviously are people here in the United States recruiting young Somali Americans to go over to Somalia to be trained to fight. And of course, as we will hear from our witnesses in this committee, will ask, perhaps worrisome, particularly to us, being trained to return to the United States to carry out terrorist attacks here. The primary questions for this hearing, as I see them, are who influenced these young men, apparently at least 20 of them, maybe more, to return to Somalia and join al-Shabaab? Who financed their trips? What, if any, role did local mosque leadership play in recruiting the young men to join al-Shabaab? What role did the internet play, both in the form of online content and email communications from those who have already returned to Somalia, in recruiting and radicalizing the young men? What influence does Islamist ideology in Minneapolis play in creating a fertile ground for al-Shabaab recruiters? Will those who have disappeared use their American passports to return and then plan and execute terrorist attacks here in our homeland? And why does al-Shabaab want American and other recruits from the West when there are presumably plenty of young men willing to fight in Somalia? Those are important questions. They go directly to the mandate that this committee has had to protect the homeland security of the American people. I thank all the witnesses who have come before us, particularly those who have come from the Somali American community in Minneapolis. It takes some courage to do so. I think it takes some both love of their own ethnic community and dedication to America that brings them here. And for all of that, we are grateful and look forward to hearing them.